With shock written all over his face, he took a step back, his voice trembling with disbelief. Who is this man with you?" She lifted her chin, a proud, almost defiant smile playing on her lips. Then, locking eyes with him, she delivered the words that shattered his world, words that would haunt him forever. "This is my son, and your greatest enemy. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. I am James Peter, your temporary host, and I feel like the luckiest man alive to serve such a loyal and loving family like you. Today is Wednesday, a day of reflection, love, and unity. And before we begin, I want to say a heartfelt prayer for my family. May love wrap around you like the warmest embrace. May peace fill your hearts no matter the storm. May every challenge you face turn into strength, and may our bond as a family grow unbreakable, stronger with each passing day. But, my family, I must be honest with you. My heart is heavy today, because something is happening that hurts Mr. Peter deeply. Our views are going down day by day, and it breaks his heart. He built this house of love with so much care, so much passion. Every story, every word was for you. And now YouTube is not recommending our content to all our loyal family members. Many of you are missing out, and some are not watching the full stories. And that is why today I ask for just one promise from you, my family, a promise to stand together. Please like this video, share it, comment below. We are one family. Because that is the truth, we are one. A family built on love, loyalty, and the most passionate stories ever told. Let's bring our family back together. Let's make our house of love stronger than ever. And now, with all the love in my heart, let's begin today's story. A story that will touch your soul and remind you why love is the most powerful force in the world. With love, always. Chapter 1. First Glance. The jazz club smelled of cedar and whiskey, with notes of expensive perfume and cigarette smoke lingering in the air like ghosts of conversations past. The soft amber lighting cast everyone in a flattering glow, hiding imperfections and creating an atmosphere of intimate possibility. Thaddeus Mercer sat alone at the polished mahogany bar, his Italian leather shoes resting on the brass rail as his manicured fingers tapped an unconscious rhythm against his crystal tumbler of 18-year-old bourbon. At 32, Thaddeus had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal for his father's investment firm, Mercer Financial Holdings, yet the celebration felt peculiarly hollow. The congratulatory messages flooding his phone remained unanswered. The champagne his father had sent to his office sat unopened. Expensive suits, luxury penthouses, and exotic vacations had become mundane comforts that failed to fill the emptiness growing inside him, an emptiness he could neither name nor escape. That's when Imani Rhodes walked onto the small stage, her presence immediately commanding attention without demanding it. She wore no sequins or flashy jewelry like the previous performers, just a simple deep blue dress that hugged her curves before flowing gracefully to her knees, a single silver pendant catching the light as she moved. When she stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it with practiced ease, the room fell silent in anticipation, conversations trailing off mid-sentence. The first notes of "Summertime" escaped her lips, and Thaddeus forgot to breathe. Her voice filled the room like smoke, wrapping around each note with an intimacy that made his skin prickle and his heart rate quicken. Her dark brown skin glowed under the amber stage lights, her close-cropped curls framing high cheekbones and full lips that shaped each word with precision and feeling. She didn't perform the song, she inhabited it, transforming Gershwin's classic into something both ancient and newborn. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Thaddeus remained still, transfixed, his drink forgotten. He ordered another and stayed through her entire set, watching how she transformed each standard into something personal and new. how she engaged with the small quartet, backing her with respectful nods and genuine smiles. After her final bow, he made his way to the stage door, stopping to purchase a single white lily from the bartender who kept them for special occasions. "You're waiting for someone." Imani's voice was lighter in conversation than in song, but still carried that distinctive warmth that had captivated him throughout her performance. She had changed into jeans and a simple blouse, a weathered saxophone case in one hand. "For you, actually." Thaddeus stepped forward, extending the lily with a confidence that masked his unusual nervousness. "Your performance was extraordinary, unlike anything I've heard before." Imani studied him, his tailored Tom Ford suit, his confident stance, the Patek Philippe watch glimpsing from his cuff, and saw wealth walking and talking. But his eyes, an unusual shade of gray-green, held something unexpected. Vulnerability and genuine appreciation, not the entitled admiration she'd grown accustomed to seeing from men in expensive suits. "I don't usually accept flowers from strangers." She made no move to take the lily, her free hand resting protectively on her saxophone case. "Thaddeus Mercer." He extended his hand instead, recognizing her hesitation. "Imani Rhodes." She took it briefly, her grip firm and professional. "And I still don't know you, Mr. Mercer. Maybe coffee could change that. Tomorrow morning?" He offered the question simply, without pressing or presumption. Imani considered him, her eyes searching his face for hidden agendas, for the usual signs of men who saw her as an exotic conquest rather than a person. Finding none, she nodded slightly. "Coffee only," she specified, "at Blue Note Cafe on Westheimer. Kale Patumani." He nodded, trying not to smile too broadly. "I'll be there at 9:45. As she walked away with her saxophone case, declining his offer of a car service with a polite but firm headshake, Thaddeus felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, tomorrow mattered more than yesterday's profits or next week's projections. For the first time in years, he felt awake, truly present in his own life. The next morning, he arrived at 9:30, fidgeting with his watch and ordering her favorite, information he'd gleaned from the club bartender after slipping him a generous tip. He chose a quiet corner table, away from the morning rush of commuters grabbing to-go cups. When Imani walked in at precisely 10 o'clock, wearing jeans and a simple yellow blouse, her natural beauty highlighted by minimal makeup, she looked even more striking in daylight than she had on stage. "You're early," she observed, sliding into the seat across from him, setting her worn leather messenger bag beside her chair. "Punctuality is a virtue in my line of work." He pushed a steaming mug toward her. "Hazelnut latte, 1 sugar, extra hot?" Her eyebrow raised, perfect arch expressing curiosity mixed with mild suspicion. "You've been asking about me." "Guilty as charged." He smiled, a genuine expression that softened his usually serious features. "Is that a problem?" "Depends on why you're interested." She wrapped her fingers around the mug but didn't drink, studying him over its rim. "Because when you sing, the world makes sense in a way I can't explain." The honesty surprised even him, the words emerging unfiltered. "And I'd like to know the woman who can do that." Imani wrapped her hands around the mug, studying him over the rim with eyes that seemed to see through pretense. "Most men in suits like that are looking for a trophy or a temporary distraction." "I have enough trophies gathering dust," Thaddeus replied, gesturing vaguely as if indicating an imaginary shelf of meaningless awards. "And distractions are easy to find. Understanding is rare." Something in his answer must have satisfied her, because she settled back in her chair, taking a sip of the perfectly prepared latte. "So, Thaddeus Mercer, what shall we talk about for our allotted coffee time?" "Everything," he answered simply. "Let's start with everything." Chapter 2. Different Worlds. Coffee turned into lunch, their conversation flowing so naturally that neither noticed the cafe had emptied and refilled with the lunch crowd. Lunch became dinner 3 days later at a small Ethiopian restaurant she recommended, where they ate with their hands and he discovered flavors that had never graced his family's formal dining table. Dinner stretched into long walks through the city park, talking until security politely asked them to leave because the gates were closing, the moon high overhead as they reluctantly parted ways. Imani taught music at Benjamin Taylor High School, a public institution in a struggling neighborhood where resources were scarce, but talent was abundant. Her evenings were spent performing at small venues around the city, building a modest reputation among jazz aficionados. Thaddeus found himself captivated by her passion, how she spoke about her students as if they were her own children, her eyes lighting up when describing breakthroughs and her voice softening when recounting their struggles. "You could be performing at Carnegie Hall," he told her one evening, as they sat on a park bench, sharing a container of street vendor ice cream, the simple pleasure of melting vanilla more satisfying than the molecular gastronomy desserts at his usual establishments. "Your talent is extraordinary. Why teach in a school where they can't even afford to repair the instruments?" Because when Deshaun Jackson, who's been told his whole life he'll amount to nothing, finally masters a piece he's been practicing for months, that moment is worth more than any applause I could receive. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, hands gesturing expressively, ice cream momentarily forgotten. Besides, not everyone gets to choose between passion and practicality. Some of us have to blend them, find meaning in the intersection rather than the extremes. Imani's world was foreign to Thaddeus, its rules and rhythms unlike anything he'd experienced. His life had been prep schools with manicured quads, Ivy League connections, and boardrooms where millions changed hands with a signature. Hers was community programs operating on shoestring budgets, second-hand instruments lovingly restored, and making beauty from scarcity, finding notes between the obvious keys. He found himself drawn to her reality, its rawness and honesty refreshing after years of corporate artifice and strategic relationships. "Your father doesn't approve of me," Imani stated plainly one evening as they sat on her apartment balcony, surrounded by potted herbs and string lights, sharing a bottle of wine that cost less than Thaddeus's usual lunch. It wasn't a question but an observation delivered without self-pity. "He doesn't know you," Thaddeus replied, but they both knew it was more complicated than simple unfamiliarity. Reginald Mercer had built his fortune through ruthless determination and strategic ruthlessness. Old money had scorned him. He'd fought his way into their circles through sheer force of will and strategic acquisitions, sometimes hostile, always effective. He expected his son to continue his legacy, to sacrifice personal happiness for family prestige if necessary, just as he had done. When Thaddeus had introduced Imani at a family dinner, bringing her into the Mercer mansion with its ancestral portraits and antique furniture, his father's cold politeness had been worse than outright rejection, his measuring gaze assessing her value like a potential acquisition. "She speaks well," Reginald had commented afterward, as if surprised, the condescension thinly veiled. "Her background is unusual for our circles." He sipped his brandy, eyes calculating. "Tell me, how serious is this dalliance?" "It's not a dalliance, father," Thaddeus had replied, tension evident in his posture. "Imani is important to me." Reginald's expression shifted subtly. Investment banking requires certain connections, certain associations. The Mercer name opens doors because of what it represents: tradition, solidity, heritage. Consider that before becoming too entangled. The conversation left Thaddeus unsettled, but he hadn't shared it with Imani, unwilling to taint their relationship with his father's thinly veiled racism. Instead, he kissed her under the string lights of her small balcony and promised himself that his father's expectations would not define his happiness or dictate his future. The Mercer legacy was substantial, but it wasn't worth sacrificing authentic connection. As months passed, Thaddeus found himself spending more time in Imani's world than his own. He attended school concerts in auditoriums with broken air conditioning, helped repair instruments donated to her program, and sat in the back of her classrooms, amazed at how she commanded respect from teenagers who seemed determined to respect nothing. In her presence, he felt both humbled and inspired, his wealth and status irrelevant compared to the meaningful impact she made daily. "You've changed," his father commented during a quarterly review meeting, sliding performance reports across his imposing desk with manicured fingers. "Your focus is slipping. The Denhurst account noticed your absence during their last event." "My performance metrics are higher than ever," Thaddeus countered, indicating the impressive figures on the spreadsheet before them. "Revenue is up 12% under my management." "Numbers aren't everything," Reginald dismissed, the irony of this statement from a man who measured life in balance sheets apparently lost on him. "Presence matters. Dedication matters. Relationships with the right people matter." He leaned across his desk, his voice lowering to the tone he reserved for his most serious pronouncements. "The Hampton merger needs your full attention, not divided loyalty. Their daughter Elizabeth has asked about you twice now." Thaddeus left the meeting unsettled, his father's implications hanging in the air like a fog he couldn't dispel. That night, watching Imani perform at a small jazz club, her voice transforming a simple melody into something transcendent, he realized he had crossed a threshold he couldn't return from. She had become essential, not supplementary. The thought terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Chapter 3. The Proposal. 8 months into their relationship, Thaddeus took Imani to Martha's Vineyard, booking a private flight that made her uncomfortable until he explained it was more practical than commercial for the short trip. He rented a beachfront cottage, modest by his standards, but charming in its weathered shingles and panoramic ocean views. On their second evening, as the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky in strokes of pink and gold that no artist could replicate, he knelt in the sand. "You've shown me what it means to live with purpose," he said, his voice uncharacteristically tremulous, as he opened a small velvet box containing his grandmother's emerald ring, the only family heirloom his father hadn't controlled. "Every moment with you feels more authentic than all the years that came before. I've accumulated wealth, but never real richness until now. Marry me, Imani." Tears filled her eyes, catching the sunset's glow. "Your family," she began, concern etching lines around her mouth. "Doesn't matter. We matter." He remained on one knee, waves lapping at the shore behind him, sand clinging to his tailored slacks. "I choose you, today and every day. Whatever comes with that choice, I accept without reservation." "The world won't make it easy for us," she warned, her voice catching as she glanced down at their joined hands, her deep brown skin against his lighter tone, a contrast that strangers commented on with looks or words. "Not just your family. Two worlds that don't understand each other. A society that will judge us before knowing us. People who will see a rich white man and a black woman and make assumptions about both of us. Then we'll create our own world," he promised, rising to take both her hands in his. "One that honors both our pasts but builds something new, something ours. Let them judge. Their narrow vision is their limitation, not ours." She took the ring with trembling fingers, the emerald gleaming against her skin. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes," as if confirming it to herself as much as to him. Later that night, wrapped in blankets on the porch of their rented cottage, listening to waves crash against the shore in rhythmic percussion, she whispered, "They'll make it hard for us. Your father, your social circle, my world too, in different ways. Then we'll be hard to break," he promised, kissing her temple, inhaling the jasmine scent of her hair. Diamond hard, unbreakable. Their engagement announcement appeared in the business section of the newspaper, Reginald's influence ensuring it wasn't prominently featured in the society pages where Mercer family news typically appeared. Still, the small notice with their professional headshots side by side caused ripples. The Mercer phone lines buzzed with thinly veiled concerns from family friends, business associates, and social connections who expressed surprise and offered supportive advice that carried undertones of disapproval. Thaddeus ignored them all, focusing instead on creating a life that would blend their worlds without erasing either identity. He accompanied Imani to her school's faculty gatherings. She attended selected business functions where she charmed some and discomfited others with her intelligence and directness. They began looking at houses in neighborhoods neither would have previously considered, neutral territory to build their shared future. Reginald called his son to his study a week after the announcement ran, the summons delivered by his executive assistant with clinical professionalism. "She's using you," he said without preamble, standing with his back to Thaddeus, looking out over the manicured garden where generations of Mercers had plotted financial conquests and dynastic marriages. "Women like her see dollar signs, not people. I've seen it before. Your grandfather nearly fell victim to a similar situation before your grandmother saved him from himself." "You don't get to talk about her that way," Thaddeus replied, his voice so cold it surprised even him. He had never spoken to his father in that tone before, had been raised to show deference even when disagreeing. "You know nothing about her, about us, about what we've built." "I've already built everything for you," Reginald continued as if Thaddeus hadn't spoken, turning to face his son with the same expression he used when hostile takeovers became necessary. "A legacy, a reputation, connections that open doors before you even reach for the handle. Don't throw it away on some girl from the wrong side of town with a pretty voice and sob stories about underprivileged children." The wrong side? Or just the wrong color? Thaddeus's question hung in the air, giving voice to the unspoken prejudice beneath his father's concerns. The silence between them stretched like a rubber band, ready to snap. Reginald turned slowly, his expression carved from granite, eyes narrowing slightly at his son's unexpected challenge. "You'll choose," he finally said, each word precise and weighted. "Her or your birthright? The firm or this diversionary romance? I won't have the Mercer name attached to a social experiment in progressive dating." Thaddeus walked out, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the framed investment certificates lining the hallway. That night, he asked Imani to move into his penthouse apartment, needing to create physical distance from his father's influence. "We'll create our own family," he promised as they lay in bed, her head on his chest. "One built on love, not ledgers." She traced patterns on his skin, her artist's fingers creating invisible melodies along his collarbone. "Your father will never accept me. Are you prepared for what that means long-term? Family holidays, future children, business connections. Then he'll never truly know me." Thaddeus kissed her forehead, breathing in her familiar scent. "His loss. We have each other. That's enough." But as he fell asleep, doubt crept in like a shadow, stretching long fingers across his certainty. The Mercer legacy was centuries old, built by generations of men who considered sacrifice a birthright and family obligation sacred. Could he really walk away from that history? And what would remain of him if he did? His identity had been shaped by the Mercer name since birth. Removing that foundation might collapse the entire structure of his self-understanding. Chapter 4. Wedding Bells and Warning Signs. Their wedding was modest by Mercer standards, but beautiful in its authenticity and personal touches. Held in the botanical garden where they'd spent many Sunday afternoons discussing their future, They exchanged vows beneath a canopy of wisteria and climbing roses. Imani wore an elegant sheath dress in ivory silk that sparkled subtly in the dappled sunlight, its clean lines emphasizing her natural grace. Her cousin, a florist from New Orleans, had created her bouquet of white lilies and blue hydrangeas, simplicity and truth, the language of flowers speaking their values. Thaddeus couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on her uncle's arm, her smile containing the same warmth that had first captured him in that dimly lit jazz club. His voice broke slightly as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, the traditional vows supplemented with their personal pledges to honor each other's independence while building shared dreams. To everyone's surprise, Reginald attended the ceremony. He sat stiffly in the front row, his expression unreadable as his son married the woman he considered unsuitable for the Mercer name. Several business associates seated nearby kept glancing in his direction, gauging his reaction as if calculating the social and financial implications of this union. He spoke briefly to the couple during the reception, offering a terse congratulations that sounded more like a business acknowledgement than a blessing before departing early. "At least he came," Thaddeus said, attempting to find optimism in the cold gesture as they watched his father's chauffeur-driven Mercedes pull away. "That's something. Maybe the beginning of acceptance." Imani squeezed his hand but said nothing, her silence more honest than false reassurance would have been. Imani's family, by contrast, embraced Thaddeus with cautious warmth. Her mother, Loretta, a retired nurse with arthritis-gnarled hands and wisdom-filled eyes that had seen 6 decades of American racial history, pulled him aside during the reception. She led him to a quiet corner of the garden, her movements slow but deliberate. "Love her loudly," she advised, her grip on his arm surprisingly strong, anchoring him to the moment. "The world will try to make her feel small for loving you. People will question her motives, her worth, her right to stand beside you. Don't you ever add to that burden, even on your worst days." "I won't," Thaddeus promised, kissing the older woman's cheek with genuine respect. "She's the best part of my life." Loretta studied him, her gaze penetrating. "And when the shine wears off, when life gets complicated and love requires work, will you still see her value then? Or will you retreat to the world that's always embraced you without question?" Before he could respond, Imani appeared at his side, linking her arm through his. "Mom, are you interrogating my husband already?" Her tone was light but carried an undercurrent of protection. "Just sharing wisdom," Loretta replied, patting her daughter's cheek. "Someone has to." The first year of marriage brought adjustments neither had anticipated. Imani continued teaching but felt increasingly uncomfortable with the wealth that surrounded her in Thaddeus's world. Charitable galas and corporate functions became exercises in proving herself worthy to people who had already decided she wasn't. She endured subtle inquiries about her humble beginnings and compliments about being so articulate with grace that masked growing resentment. "They talk to me like I'm a social project you've undertaken," she confided after one particularly trying event where a board member's wife had asked if she'd grown up in the projects when Imani mentioned her urban education initiatives. "Or worse, like I've somehow tricked you into marriage." "They're ignorant," Thaddeus responded, loosening his tie with frustrated movements. "Their opinions don't matter." "But they do matter," Imani countered. "They're your colleagues, your father's friends, the people who determine your professional success. Their opinions shape our reality whether we want them to or not." Meanwhile, Thaddeus found himself increasingly torn between his father's expectations at the firm and his life with Imani. Reginald had begun a subtle campaign of increased responsibilities, late meetings, and weekend work requirements that chipped away at the couple's time together. Each assignment came wrapped in language about proving himself, securing their future, and demonstrating his commitment to the Mercer legacy. "You missed dinner with my mother again," Imani confronted him one night when he came home past midnight, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. The dining table still held the remnants of what had clearly been a special meal, candles burned down to stubs, wine glasses half empty. "This is the third time this month. The Hong Kong market doesn't care about dinner plans," he replied defensively, exhaustion making his tone sharper than intended. "This deal is worth millions to the firm. If we secure the Liang portfolio, it opens the entire Asian market." "And what's family worth?" Imani asked, her voice steady but her eyes revealing the hurt beneath her composed exterior. "My mother took 3 buses to get here, Thaddeus. She cooked all day despite her arthritis flaring up because she wanted to make her special jambalaya for you." Guilt washed over him, momentarily drowning his professional justifications. "I'm sorry. I'll make it up to her, to both of you. I'll take her to dinner at that Creole place she likes on Saturday." "This isn't just about tonight." Imani sighed, sinking onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. "It's about patterns. You're working later and later. When you are home, you're distracted, checking emails or taking calls. It's like I'm losing you a little more each day." Thaddeus sat beside her, taking her hand, noting how the emerald of her engagement ring caught the light. "It's just temporary. Once I prove myself to the board." "To your father, you mean?" she interrupted gently. "To the board," he repeated firmly, though they both knew the distinction was meaningless. Reginald Mercer was the board in all practical terms, his influence determining every significant decision. "This phase will pass. Then we'll have more time, more freedom. I didn't marry the firm, Thaddeus. I married you." Imani pulled her hand away, creating physical distance to match the emotional gap widening between them. "But lately, I'm not sure there's a difference. You're becoming Reginald's son more than my husband." The accusation stung because it contained a seed of truth he wasn't ready to acknowledge. The argument dissipated without resolution, a pattern that became increasingly common in their household. Thaddeus threw himself into work, telling himself it was for their future, for the family they planned to have, for the security that would allow Imani to pursue her musical career without financial constraints. Imani retreated into her music and her students, building a life that didn't depend on his presence, creating meaning through her teaching and community work. The weight of unspoken words. Chapter 5. The breaking point. Over the months following their heated argument about prioritizing family versus work, Thaddeus and Imani's marriage deteriorated gradually rather than suddenly. Small fractures appeared daily, dinners canceled with last-minute texts, conversations that stopped when they touched anything meaningful, sleeping schedules that rarely overlapped. Their penthouse apartment became a space they shared rather than a life they built together, each inhabiting their own orbit with occasional intersections that grew increasingly strained. Thaddeus began accompanying his father on international business trips with increasing frequency, each absence longer than the last. During one extended stay in Dubai, where desert heat shimmered outside air-conditioned conference rooms, Reginald introduced him to Sophia Lawson, daughter of their biggest potential investor. She was Harvard Business School, fourth-generation wealth, with a sharp mind for acquisitions and a laugh that never quite reached her eyes. "She understands our world," Reginald commented after a dinner where Sophia had impressed everyone with her knowledge of emerging markets and family connections across 3 continents. They stood on the balcony of their hotel suite, the artificial islands of Dubai glittering below like a man-made constellation. "She'd make an excellent partner for someone with your trajectory. The Lawson portfolio would integrate seamlessly with our Asian expansion." "I already have a partner," Thaddeus reminded him coldly, swirling 18-year-old scotch in a crystal tumbler. "My wife. Remember her? The woman you refused to toast at our wedding?" Reginald sipped his whiskey, unmoved by his son's sarcasm. A wife you barely see. A wife who doesn't understand the first thing about what you do, about the legacy you represent. When was the last time you two had a meaningful conversation that wasn't about her school or her music? Don't, Thaddeus warned, his knuckles whitening around his glass. You know nothing about my marriage. I know what I see, Reginald continued, his voice carrying the practiced precision of a man accustomed to delivering difficult truths in boardrooms. Marriage is a partnership, son. Are you and your singer truly partners? Or are you living in separate worlds that occasionally intersect for convenience and physical comfort? The question haunted Thaddeus during the overnight flight home, following him like a shadow through customs and into the dawn-lit streets. He arrived at their penthouse apartment just after sunrise to find Imani asleep on the sofa, sheet music scattered around her, a pencil still loosely held in her fingers. She had fallen asleep waiting for him, again, her composition work evident in the coffee-ringed pages and eraser shavings dusting the imported marble coffee table. He carried her to bed, her body fitting against his with familiar rightness that made his chest ache. When she stirred awake, blinking in the soft morning light filtering through the blinds, they made love with an intensity that felt like desperation rather than passion. Both seeking connection they'd lost somewhere between compromise and ambition. Afterward, lying in the gray morning light with her head on his chest, Thaddeus promised himself he would do better. Be present, prioritize their marriage over his father's machinations and the firm's insatiable appetite for his time and attention. That resolution lasted 3 weeks before the demands of work pulled him back into old patterns. The distance between them grew, conversations becoming increasingly strained when they happened at all. Imani stopped asking about his day. He stopped inquiring about her students. They moved through shared spaces like diplomatic representatives of opposing countries, carefully polite but fundamentally disconnected. Then came the week that would change everything. Imani had been feeling unwell for nearly a month. Fatigue dragging at her limbs, nausea in the mornings, a strange sensitivity to smells that made even her favorite foods unpalatable. After weeks of attributing it to stress and their crumbling relationship, she finally visited her doctor. The diagnosis was both miraculous and terrifying. She was 8 weeks pregnant. After a year of trying, of temperature tracking and disappointment, of fertility discussions that always seemed to get postponed due to Thaddeus's work commitments, they had created a life during what might have been their last intimate moment. For 3 days, Imani kept the news to herself, wrestling with how to tell a husband who had become essentially a houseguest in their shared home. She vacillated between hope that a child might heal their fractured marriage and fear that bringing a baby into such instability would be selfish. Finally, she decided to create a special evening, a neutral ground where they could reconnect and she could share the news. She prepared his favorite meal, braised short ribs with roasted root vegetables, the comfort food his grandmother had made on special occasions. She set the table with candles and the good china they'd received as wedding gifts, but rarely used. Beside Thaddeus's plate, she placed a tiny pair of hand-knitted baby shoes, a gift from her mother who had suspected before the test confirmed. But as the hours passed and the candles burned low, Thaddeus didn't arrive. At 10 p.m., as she sat alone at the beautifully set table, now cold and formal in its abandonment, the phone rang. "I'm staying at the office," he said, his voice distant and distracted. "The Singapore deal is falling apart, and we need to rework the entire proposal before the Asian markets open." "Thaddeus, we need to talk," Imani said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's important." "Not tonight, Imani. I've been in meetings for 14 hours straight. I'll be home tomorrow evening, I promise." She considered telling him over the phone, but stopped herself. This news, this potential new beginning for them, deserved more than a distracted conversation while he multitasked in his office. "Tomorrow, then," she agreed, hanging up before he could hear the disappointment in her voice. When Thaddeus finally returned home the next evening, he found Imani waiting in the living room. The baby shoes sat on the coffee table between them, a small but unmistakable statement. "What's this?" he asked, setting down his briefcase, his mind still half occupied with work concerns. "I'm pregnant," she stated simply, watching his face carefully. Thaddeus froze, his expressions cycling rapidly through shock, confusion, and something darker she couldn't immediately identify. "Pregnant?" he repeated, as if the word were foreign. "How is that possible?" It's been weeks since—" "8 weeks, to be exact," Imani supplied, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat abdomen. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably as Thaddeus visibly calculated dates. Then, in a voice she barely recognized, he asked, "Are you sure it's mine?" The words hung in the air between them, impossible to take back, impossible to unhear. Imani felt as though she'd been physically struck, the pain of his question stealing her breath. "How dare you?" she whispered, each syllable precise despite the emotion threatening to choke her. What followed was the worst argument of their marriage, escalating from hurt feelings to vindictive accusations. In his exhaustion and shock, Thaddeus said the unforgivable, "Maybe my father was right about you all along." Imani's expression hardened into something Thaddeus had never seen before, a cold, implacable dignity that made him suddenly afraid. "I'm leaving," she said, gathering her purse and car keys. "I won't raise a child in a home where trust is so easily broken." When he tried to physically stop her from leaving, grabbing her arm with more force than he'd intended, the last thread of their relationship snapped. She looked from his hand on her arm to his face with an expression of such betrayal that he immediately released her. "Your child," she said, rubbing the marks his fingers had left. "5 minutes ago, you questioned if it was even yours." She walked out of their home and their marriage that night, leaving behind a man who stood stunned in his empty penthouse, suddenly understanding exactly what he had lost. Chapter 6. Separate Lives. Imani returned to her mother's modest home in 3rd Ward, a historically black neighborhood far removed from the gleaming skyscrapers and penthouses of Thaddeus's world. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a heart shattered into so many pieces she doubted it could ever be whole again. Loretta Rhodes took one look at her daughter's face and opened her arms without questions, holding her as she broke down in sobs for the first time since leaving the penthouse 3 days earlier. "He didn't want the baby," Imani finally explained that night, curled on her childhood bed that suddenly seemed too small to contain her grief. "He questioned if it was even his." Loretta's expression hardened, the lines around her mouth deepening. "Then he doesn't deserve either of you." She smoothed her daughter's hair as she had when Imani was a child, afraid of thunderstorms. "You come from strong stock, baby girl. This child will too." The next day, with her mother's support, Imani filed for divorce, requesting no alimony, no property division, wanting nothing from the man who had questioned not just her fidelity but her fundamental worth. Her only demands were her personal possessions and complete separation from the Mercer fortune. Pride and hurt drove her decision, a determination to prove she had never been after his money. Thaddeus, once the initial anger faded and sleep cleared his mind, tried to contact her. His calls went unanswered, his texts unread. When he went to Loretta's house, the older woman met him on the porch, her arthritis-gnarled hands gripping a baseball bat with surprising strength. "You don't get to question my daughter's honor and then come looking for forgiveness," she informed him, eyes flashing with the same fire he'd fallen in love with in Imani's. "You made your choice. Now live with it." When the divorce papers arrived, delivered by courier to his office rather than their home, he was stung by her refusal to seek financial support. prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on, his father's requirement, made the divorce legally simple but emotionally devastating. The document contained no mention of the pregnancy, no claim for child support, no acknowledgement of the life growing inside her. His pride, wounded by what he perceived as her rejection of his wealth and her determination to raise their child without him, kept him from pursuing her further. He signed the papers without contesting them, adding only a note. "This doesn't have to be final. Call me when you're ready to talk." She never called. She made her choice, Reginald told him over brandy in the study, satisfaction poorly disguised as sympathy. "Now make yours. The Shanghai expansion needs your full attention. Life goes on, son." For a time, Thaddeus followed his father's path of burying emotion in work. He threw himself into expanding the Mercer financial empire across continents, working 16-hour days that left no time for reflection. He dated occasionally, poised, accomplished women who understood his world and made no demands on his heart. None lasted more than a few months. None penetrated the armor he'd built around himself after Imani left. At night, in the quiet moments before sleep, he'd sometimes stand on his balcony, looking toward the neighborhood where Imani had taught, wondering if she was still in the city or if she'd taken the Chicago position, wondering if she'd had the baby, wondering if it had his eyes, his mother's smile, Imani's talent, wondering what might have been if he hadn't let exhaustion and his father's poison cloud his judgment on the most important day of his life. Meanwhile, Imani gave birth to a son, naming him Xavier Thaddeus Rhodes, acknowledging his heritage while claiming him fully as her own. She never put Thaddeus's name on the birth certificate, a decision born of both protection and punishment. The Chicago job had fallen through after her abrupt departure from her previous position, but her reputation as an educator and performer helped her secure a teaching position at the prestigious Eastman School of Music. The birth was difficult, the pregnancy complicated by stress and heartbreak. Imani spent 2 days in labor before Xavier finally arrived, 7 pounds of perfection with his mother's full lips and unmistakably his father's unusual gray-green eyes. Looking into those eyes for the first time, Imani felt a complex surge of emotions, fierce love for her son, mixed with painful reminders of the man who had helped create him. "He looks just like you," Loretta said, holding her grandson with tears in her eyes. "But those eyes are his father's," Imani acknowledged quietly. "Let's hope they're the only thing he inherits from that side of the family." With her mother's help and by taking on additional private students even while nursing an infant, Imani raised Xavier in a small but loving home filled with music and laughter. She built a new life, piece by piece, channeling her heartbreak into composition and her love into her son. The first year was the hardest, sleepless nights with a colicky baby, financial worries as medical bills from the complicated birth mounted, and the constant ache of navigating motherhood without a partner. But as Xavier grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerging like a unique melody, Imani found joy overriding grief. His first steps, taken toward her piano as she practiced, his first word, "Mema," followed quickly by music, his infectious laugh that filled their small apartment with sunshine, regardless of the weather outside. As Xavier grew, he inevitably asked about his father. Imani never lied, but she tempered the truth for young ears. "Your father and I loved each other once, but we couldn't find a way to keep that love healthy," she explained when he was 7, his serious eyes, gray-green like his father's, studying her for signs of deception. "He doesn't know about you because I chose to protect you from a battle that wasn't yours to fight." "Does he hate me?" Xavier asked, the question breaking her heart anew. "No, sweet boy, he doesn't know you. That's different from hate." She pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair. "Someday, when you're older, you can decide if you want to know him. That will be your choice, not mine." And so, year by year, mother and son built a life of purpose and joy. Xavier inherited his mother's musical talent and his unknown father's head for mathematics, a combination that made him exceptional at both. By age 10, he was performing in recitals alongside students twice his age. By 12, he was tackling advanced calculus for fun. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddeus continued building the Mercer Empire, each success feeling increasingly hollow without someone to share it with. No amount of professional achievement could fill the void Imani and the child he'd never known had left in his life. Chapter 7. The Discovery. As years passed, Imani built a respected career beyond teaching. She founded a nonprofit music program for underprivileged youth that gained national recognition, combining her educational expertise with her performance skills to create opportunities for children like those she'd taught in her first position. Her compositions were performed by major orchestras, her methods adopted by conservatories. Xavier, now 15, had grown into a remarkable young man, tall for his age, with his mother's warm smile and his father's analytical mind. When Imani's program received a significant grant from a prestigious philanthropic foundation, the award ceremony was covered by local media, her success story of building something meaningful from personal adversity, making for compelling human interest. Xavier stood proudly beside her during the interview, articulate and poised as he explained his role in helping younger students master difficult pieces. In his penthouse across town, Thaddeus froze when her face appeared on his television screen during the evening news. Older, more poised, but unmistakably Imani, speaking eloquently about musical education as a path to self-discovery and community connection. And beside her stood a teenage boy with her smile and unmistakably his eyes, the same distinctive gray-green that had marked Mercer men for generations, currently widened in nervous excitement as the reporter asked about his role in the program. "I'm just proud of my mom," the boy said, his voice carrying the first hints of adult depth. "She's shown me that music isn't just something beautiful, it's something powerful. It can change lives." Thaddeus sat heavily on his sofa, remote control forgotten in his hand as the segment ended and the news moved on to weather. But he remained fixed on the now vanished image, on the boy with his eyes and Imani's determined chin. His son, their son, the child he'd questioned and lost before ever knowing. The next morning, ignoring his father's calls about a pending acquisition, Thaddeus hired a private investigator, propriety and legal niceties forgotten in his desperate need to know more about the boy, glimpsed briefly on his television. The results arrived in a manila envelope a week later, clinically detailing what he had already suspected. Xavier Thaddeus Rhodes, 15, born 8 months after Imani left, exceptional student at Phillips Academy, scholarship recipient despite his mother's comfortable financial status, gifted saxophonist like his mother, but also showing remarkable mathematical aptitude. No father listed on the birth certificate, but the timing, the name, and the unmistakable resemblance confirmed what Thaddeus had known instantly upon seeing him. The file included photographs. Xavier at a school concert, at a mathematics competition, walking with his mother through a park. In each image, Thaddeus could see echoes of himself at that age, alongside Imani's grace and determination. The boy was a perfect blend of them both, living proof of a love that had once seemed unbreakable. For days, Thaddeus wrestled with the revelation, emotions cycling between rage at being denied his son and crushing shame at his own behavior that had precipitated that denial. Pride in the boy's evident accomplishments warred with grief for the years lost, the baseball games never attended, the birthdays missed, the bedtime stories unread. Finally, he contacted Imani's nonprofit under the guise of a potential donor, requesting a meeting with the director to discuss philanthropic alignment. It was cowardly, perhaps, but direct contact had failed 15 years earlier. He needed to see her, to explain, to begin the impossible task of making amends. "Mr. Mercer is here to see you," her assistant announced, no recognition in her voice. She was too young to remember the society pages from 15 years ago, when the Mercer Rhodes wedding had caused such a stir. When Imani walked into her office and saw him, her professional smile freezing into shock, he felt time compress between them, 15 years collapsing into a heartbeat. She looked different, her hair longer now, streaked with premature silver at the temples, her body more maternal than the lithe dancer's frame he remembered. But her eyes still held the same intelligence and fire that had captivated him in that jazz club so long ago. "Hello, Imani," he said softly, rising from the visitor's chair where he'd been perched uncomfortably for 20 minutes. "Get out." Her voice was steady, professional, but ice-cold. She hadn't closed the door behind her, her body language making it clear this conversation would not be happening. "We need to talk." He remained where he was, hands open at his sides in a gesture of peace. "We needed to talk 15 years ago. Now we have nothing to say." She moved to the side, clearly indicating the exit. "We have a son." The words hung between them, unavoidable now. Imani's eyes flashed, the only sign of emotion on her carefully composed face. "I have a son. Why didn't you tell me?" He took a step toward her, stopping when she tensed. "All these years, Imani, you never even gave me a chance to make it right. You questioned if he was yours. You threw me out. You made your choice." Each sentence was delivered with precision, like individual indictments. "You put your hands on me in anger. You chose your father's approval over your own child." "I was wrong," Thaddeus admitted, the words inadequate but necessary. "I was stressed and sleep-deprived and terrified of losing you. I said unforgivable things. I've regretted it every day since." "Save your excuses for someone who hasn't spent 15 years dealing with the consequences of your regrettable moment." Imani's composure slipped slightly, a tremor in her voice betraying deeper emotions. "Xavier has grown up without ever feeling unwanted or questioned. He is brilliant and kind and confident in his worth. I won't let you disrupt his life with your belated paternal interest. He's my son too." Thaddeus stepped closer, desperate now. "I have rights. Biologically, perhaps. Legally, no. You're not on his birth certificate. You've provided no support. You've shown no interest until seeing him on television made him real to you." She held her ground, unintimidated by his height or wealth or desperation. "Xavier is 15, old enough to have some say in who enters his life. I'll go to court." "Do that," Imani challenged, a dangerous gleam entering her eyes. "And I'll fight you with everything I have. I'll tell the judge how you questioned his paternity, how you grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises, how you told me to get out of your home while I was carrying your child, how you never once tried to find him until he became convenient to your narrative." Their standoff was interrupted by a knock at the open door. "Mom?" "Oh, sorry. I didn't know you had a meeting." A tall teenager stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking between the adults with confusion. "I can come back later." Thaddeus stared at his son, in person, not through a television screen or a photograph. The resemblance was even more striking up close. The shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head slightly when curious. All Mercer traits going back generations. "It's fine, Xavier. We were just finishing," Imani said, her voice softening as she addressed her son. "Mr. Mercer was just leaving." Thaddeus couldn't tear his eyes away from the boy. "Actually, I think we still have some things to discuss, Ms. Rhodes. Perhaps we could continue this conversation later, when you have more time." Xavier's gaze sharpened, his eyes, so like Thaddeus's own, narrowing slightly. "Have we met before?" "You look familiar." The question hung in the air, loaded with 15 years of absence and secrets. Imani's expression turned panicked for a split second before she regained control. "Mr. Mercer is a potential donor," she said smoothly, "and he was just leaving." Thaddeus recognized the warning in her tone, knew that pushing further now would only damage any chance of future connection. "It was nice to meet you, Xavier," he said, careful to keep his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Your mother's program is impressive. You must be very proud of her." "I am," the boy replied, still studying Thaddeus with that analytical gaze that reminded him so much of looking in a mirror. "She's changing lives." "Yes," Thaddeus agreed, finally breaking eye contact to look at Imani. "She always could." He left, but he didn't give up. He began researching his legal options while also learning everything he could about Xavier from a distance. The boy was indeed brilliant, top of his class, gifted musician like his mother, talented mathematician like his paternal grandfather, already being scouted by elite universities despite being only a sophomore. Pride and longing warred within Thaddeus. He wanted to know his son, to be part of his life, to make up for lost time. But how could he enter the boy's life without destroying it? How could he claim paternal rights without seeming to claim ownership? How could he prove himself worthy of forgiveness to a child who had never known him as father? Chapter 8. First Encounter. The school auditorium smelled of floor polish and perfume, excited parents filing in with programs and flowers for their performing children. Thaddeus chose a seat in the back row, anonymous in business casual rather than his usual bespoke suits. His heart pounded as he scanned the stage, immediately identifying Xavier among the saxophone section. The boy had grown since the news footage, lankier now, with the gangly grace of mid-adolescence. He sat with perfect posture, instrument resting across his knee, occasionally leaning to whisper something to the trumpet player beside him. His smile, Imani's smile, flashed briefly before settling into concentration as the conductor stepped to the podium. When Xavier played his solo in Duke Ellington's Take the A Train, Thaddeus felt tears prick his eyes. The boy played with technical precision that spoke to discipline and training, but also with a soul that couldn't be taught, a gift inherited from his mother. The audience burst into applause when he finished, several people rising to their feet, Thaddeus among them. After the show, fighting every instinct to rush forward and claim connection, Thaddeus waited patiently in the lobby where students emerged to meet waiting parents. When Xavier appeared, saxophone case in hand, laughing with friends, Thaddeus approached casually, as if they were strangers. Which, he acknowledged with a pang, they were. That was extraordinary playing, he told Xavier, keeping his voice light, conversational. Your Ellington solo especially. Thanks, man. The boy grinned, unaware of who he was talking to, of the genetic connection between them. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Thaddeus's high forehead and jawline, Imani's expressive eyes and graceful hands. You have real talent. I'm Thaddeus Mercer. He extended his hand, heart thundering in his chest at this first touch. Xavier shook it with an easy confidence. Xavier Rhodes. You know much about jazz? Some. I used to frequent clubs years ago. Your technique reminds me of Sonny Rollins. Fluid but disciplined. It wasn't a lie. He had attended countless jazz performances with Imani, learning to appreciate the art form through her passion for it. They talked briefly about music, about Xavier's influences, about his plans for college, still deciding between music performance and applied mathematics, before Imani appeared at the edge of the diminishing crowd. Her face paled when she saw them together, her step faltering briefly before she approached with determined calm. Xavier, your grandmother's waiting by the car, she said tightly, her gaze fixed on her son rather than acknowledging Thaddeus. Xavier looked between them, sensing tension but not understanding its source. Do you two know each other? Mr. Mercer is an acquaintance, Imani said before Thaddeus could respond, her tone making it clear this was not a happy reunion. "Go on to Grandma. I'll be right there." When Xavier left, glancing back curiously over his shoulder, Imani turned on Thaddeus with controlled fury. "How dare you approach him without my permission? I just wanted to see him up close, to talk to him." Thaddeus kept his voice low, aware of lingering audience members who might overhear. "He's remarkable, Imani. You've done an amazing job with him. He's not a museum exhibit for you to admire. He's a person with feelings that could be deeply hurt by this situation." Her eyes, still capable of expressing volumes without words, flashed warning. "Stay away from him until we figure this out properly." "Don't you think he deserves to know who his father is?" Thaddeus challenged, his own anger rising despite his determination to remain calm. 15 years, Imani. You've kept him from me for 15 years. "I've protected him for 15 years, she corrected. "From uncertainty, from rejection, from becoming a pawn in whatever game you and your father might play with his life. That's not fair. I made one terrible mistake. A mistake that told me everything I needed to know about what kind of father you would be," she interrupted. "A father who would question his child's legitimacy, who would see an innocent baby as leverage or property." As she walked away, Thaddeus called after her. "I'm filing for paternity recognition and visitation rights. You'll be served papers this week." Imani turned back, her expression resolute. "Then prepare for the fight of your life, Thaddeus, because I will burn my own life to the ground before I let you hurt my son the way you hurt me." The legal declaration had been impulsive, born of frustration and the overwhelming need to establish connection with his son. But as Thaddeus watched her walk away, he realized he had once again chosen the worst possible approach. Force would not win Imani's cooperation or Xavier's trust. Yet, how else could he bridge 15 years of absence? How could he prove himself worthy of the second chance he desperately wanted? That night, he called his attorney and set the legal process in motion, not out of malice, but from a genuine belief that official recognition was the first step toward building a relationship. What he didn't anticipate was how quickly the situation would escalate, or how painfully public it would become. Within days, the story had leaked to the financial press, heir to the Mercer fortune-seeking visitation rights with a previously unknown son. Society columnists dug up the old marriage announcement, the quiet divorce, speculating salaciously about what had happened in between. Photographs of Xavier appeared in the business section, his resemblance to Thaddeus highlighted with side-by-side comparisons. Reginald Mercer summoned his son to his office the morning after the story broke. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, slapping the newspaper down on his desk. "Claiming my son," Thaddeus replied simply. "Claiming a scandal, you mean?" Reginald paced behind his desk. "Have you thought about what this does to the firm's reputation, to the family name? My son carries the family DNA, if not the name. He matters more than reputation. Boy raised by that woman for 15 years. What values has she instilled? What agenda might she have?" Reginald shook his head. "If you're determined to pursue this, we need to control the narrative. Make it about your parental rights being denied, not about your abandonment." "I didn't abandon him," Thaddeus protested. "I didn't know about him." "A technicality the public won't care about," his father dismissed. "Image is everything. We'll need the best attorneys, the right press strategy. If the boy is to be acknowledged as a Mercer, we'll need safeguards." Thaddeus felt a chill at his father's calculating tone. "He's a person, father, not a corporate acquisition." "Everything is an acquisition, son. The only variable is the price." Reginald returned to his seat. "But I suppose it's time I met my grandson, however belatedly." The idea of his father anywhere near Xavier filled Thaddeus with sudden protective dread. Would Reginald try to mold the boy into a Mercer heir as he had done with Thaddeus? Would he undermine Imani's influence, belittle her contribution? Would he plant seeds of doubt about her motives as he had done in their marriage? For the first time, Thaddeus began to understand some of Imani's fear for their son. Not that he would physically harm Xavier, but that he might harm the boy's sense of self, his confidence in his mother's love, his understanding of his own worth apart from the Mercer name and fortune. As he left his father's office, Thaddeus wondered if he had made yet another terrible mistake. Was pursuing legal rights the best approach, or would it simply replicate the patterns of force and entitlement that had destroyed his marriage? Was there a gentler path to knowing his son, one that respected both Xavier's autonomy and Imani's legitimate concerns? The questions followed him as he prepared for the first court hearing, doubts growing even as the legal machinery he had set in motion gathered unstoppable momentum. Chapter 9. The legal battle begins. The courtroom was austere, matching the gravity of the proceedings. Judge Elaine Watkins presided, her salt and pepper hair framing a face that had seen decades of family disputes and had little patience for theatrics or dishonesty. She reviewed the preliminary filings with sharp eyes, occasionally glancing over her reading glasses at the parties seated at separate tables. "This is an unusual case," she noted, setting down the last document with deliberate precision. "Mr. Mercer, you're seeking to establish paternity and visitation rights for a child you've never met, who is now 16 years old. Miss Rhodes, you oppose this action on grounds of abandonment and emotional welfare concerns. Let's establish some facts before we proceed." The initial hearing was procedural, setting deadlines and parameters for the case that would determine Xavier's future. DNA testing was ordered despite Imani's attorney arguing that it would disrupt Xavier's life and emotional well-being. Thaddeus's lawyer, Martin Sloan, a shark in an expensive suit who specialized in high-profile custody battles, argued vehemently for temporary visitation during the proceedings. "My client has been denied his parental rights for 16 years, Sloan declared, his voice resonating in the high-ceilinged courtroom. "Every day that passes is another day stolen from his relationship with his son. Mr. Mercer is prepared to provide documentation of his substantial financial resources, his suitable living accommodations, and his commitment to fostering his son's talents and education." Imani's attorney, Vivian Chen, a formidable litigator who had built her career defending mothers in custody disputes, countered firmly. "Mr. Mercer abandoned Ms. Rhodes when she informed him of her pregnancy. He explicitly questioned the paternity of the child and demanded she leave his home. There are medical records documenting bruising consistent with Ms. Rhodes' account of physical intimidation during their final confrontation." Chen paused, letting this information register with the judge before continuing. "Now, 16 years later, he wants to disrupt this young man's life because it suddenly fits his narrative to be a father. Xavier Rhodes is thriving academically and socially. He has no existing relationship with Mr. Mercer, no emotional connection. Forced visitation would serve Mr. Mercer's desires, not Xavier's best interests." Judge Watkins denied temporary visitation but expedited the DNA testing and subsequent hearings, acknowledging both the unusual circumstances and the limited time before Xavier would reach legal adulthood. "Given the young man's age, his preferences will be given significant weight in my final determination," she added, peering at both parties over her glasses. "I strongly encourage you to consider mediation before our next court date. This young man doesn't need to be dragged through a public battle." Outside the courtroom, reporters had gathered, alerted to the high-profile case by leaks from unknown sources. The Mercer name carried weight in financial circles, and the story of a hidden heir had proven irresistible to the media. Photographers captured Thaddeus's stoic expression and Imani's dignified exit, while journalists shouted questions neither party answered. "This doesn't have to be so adversarial," Thaddeus said quietly to Imani as they waited for separate elevators, maintaining a respectful distance. "We both want what's best for Xavier." "You don't know what's best for Xavier," Imani replied, her professional composure firmly in place. "You don't know him at all. You know a concept, an idea of a son, not the reality of who he is. Then let me learn. Help me know him. You made it adversarial when you served me legal papers instead of respecting my concerns, when you blindsided him at his concert without warning or preparation." She gathered her briefcase, signaling the end of the conversation. "Once again, you've chosen force over respect. He's my son. He's a person, not property." Her eyes, still capable of piercing through his defenses after all these years, met his directly. "And he deserves better than to be a prize in your midlife crisis." The elevator arrived, sparing Thaddeus from responding to the accusation that had struck uncomfortably close to home. Was that how she saw his efforts, as a self-centered attempt to fill a void in his life, rather than genuine care for Xavier? The question lingered as he made his way through the media gauntlet outside, deflecting questions with practiced non-answers. At home that evening, he found himself staring at the investigator's file, spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Xavier's academic transcripts showed a brilliant mind. His music competition awards revealed artistic depth. Candid photographs captured a seemingly happy, well-adjusted teenager. Had he made a mistake in pursuing this so aggressively? Was Imani right that his approach would cause more harm than good? The doubts must have shown on his face when he met with Martin Sloan the next day to review strategy. "Having second thoughts?" Sloan asked, noting Thaddeus's hesitation about filing additional motions to expedite the process. "I want to know my son," Thaddeus replied, "but I don't want to traumatize him in the process." "That's what Ms. Rhodes wants you to think," Sloan dismissed. "It's a common tactic in these cases, using the child's emotional welfare as a shield against legitimate parental rights. The law is on your side here, Mr. Mercer. DNA doesn't lie, and your financial resources make you more than capable of providing for the boy's future." "His name is Xavier," Thaddeus corrected, suddenly irritated by the attorney's clinical approach. "And he seems to be doing exceptionally well without my financial resources." Sloan leaned forward, his expression calculating. "If I may speak frankly, the longer Ms. Rhodes keeps the boy, Xavier, from knowing you, the more she can shape his perception against you. We need to move quickly, establish your paternal rights legally, and then you can build the relationship at whatever pace seems appropriate." The logic made sense, even as something about it felt wrong. But what alternative did he have? Imani had made it clear she wouldn't facilitate a relationship voluntarily. The legal route seemed the only path forward, however imperfect. As the case progressed through preliminary motions and filings, Xavier inevitably learned the truth. The court-ordered DNA collection could not be hidden or explained away, nor could the increasing tension between his mother and the strange man who had appeared at his concert and now seemed to be everywhere, watching his basketball games from a distance, appearing at academic competitions, hovering at the edges of his life like a ghost, becoming solid. The DNA results confirmed what everyone already knew. Thaddeus was his biological father, the genetic connection undeniable in both science and appearance. When Imani finally told Xavier everything, the full, unvarnished truth about her relationship with Thaddeus, their bitter separation, and her reasons for keeping him away, the boy's response surprised her. "I want to meet him properly," he said, sitting at their kitchen table, fingers tracing patterns on the wood grain like he did when solving complex equations in his head. "Not as some random guy who showed up at my concert, but as whatever he is to me." Are you sure? Imani asked, masking her own pain to focus on her son's needs. You don't owe him anything, Xavier. This can all happen through the courts, with proper boundaries. I'm not doing it for him, Xavier replied with wisdom beyond his years, his gray-green eyes, so like his father's, meeting hers steadily. I'm doing it for me. I've always wondered, always had this empty space where other kids had fathers. Even if he's not what I hoped for, at least I'll know. The reality has to be better than all the things I've imagined. Imani nodded slowly, recognizing the determined set of his jaw, another inheritance from Thaddeus, though Xavier had learned to use it for resolve rather than stubbornness. I'll arrange it, but on our terms, not his, and I'll be there with you. I wouldn't have it any other way, Xavier assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. No matter what happens with him, you're my real parent, the one who stayed. Meanwhile, the case had begun attracting attention in circles beyond the financial press. A prominent civil rights attorney offered to join Imani's legal team pro bono, citing concerns about the case's racial and economic power dynamics. Several of Thaddeus's business associates quietly suggested he drop the matter, concerned about potential negative publicity for the firm. Rumors circulated about Reginald Mercer's displeasure with the situation, though publicly he maintained a united front with his son. The second court date approached with mounting tension on all sides. Xavier's school performance had begun to suffer slightly, the pressure of the situation affecting his concentration. Imani found herself fielding concerned calls from his teachers, explaining as vaguely as possible about family matters being resolved. Thaddeus received increasingly frustrated calls from his father about his distraction from critical business matters. The night before the second hearing, Imani called Thaddeus directly for the first time in 16 years. Xavier wants to meet you, she said without preamble when he answered, properly, in a controlled setting with me present. Thaddeus sat down, unprepared for this development. I want that too. He has conditions. This won't be court-ordered or legally mandated. It will be on his terms, at his pace. If at any point he feels uncomfortable, it ends immediately. Her voice was professional, the same tone she likely used negotiating contracts for her nonprofit. This doesn't change my position on your legal petition. I still believe you're approaching this entirely wrong. I understand. Thaddeus knew better than to push for more. When and where? Tomorrow, after the hearing, there's a community center where my nonprofit operates. We can use a private room there. She paused. And Thaddeus? Don't bring your father. Ever. That's non-negotiable. The request, or rather demand, surprised him. I wasn't planning to. Good. Her tone softened almost imperceptibly. Xavier deserves to form his own opinions without Reginald's influence. That man nearly destroyed our marriage with his prejudice and manipulation. I won't let him near my son until I'm confident you won't let him do the same to Xavier. After she hung up, Thaddeus sat in his study for a long time, considering her words. Had his father nearly destroyed their marriage? He had always blamed the demands of work, their different worlds, the stress of balancing competing priorities. But looking back, he could see Reginald's constant undermining, his subtle suggestions about Imani's unsuitability, his strategic scheduling of international trips just when important events in Imani's career were happening. For the first time, Thaddeus wondered if his father had orchestrated their separation, not directly, but by systematically creating conditions where failure became almost inevitable. The thought was disturbing, suggesting a level of manipulation he hadn't recognized at the time. The next morning in court, both legal teams were prepared for battle when Thaddeus's attorney requested a sidebar with the judge. After a brief, intense discussion, Judge Watkins addressed the court. It appears the parties have agreed to a voluntary meeting between the minor child and Mr. Mercer to take place in a neutral location with Ms. Rhodes present. I commend this step toward resolving matters outside the adversarial process. She looked directly at both parents. I'm temporarily staying all pending motions until after this meeting occurs. Let's see if we can find a path forward that centers the young man's needs rather than the adult's legal positions. As they exited the courtroom, Thaddeus caught Imani's eye. No words were exchanged, but a silent acknowledgement passed between them. This was about Xavier now, not their past grievances. For the first time, Thaddeus felt a glimmer of hope that they might find a way through this complicated situation without causing irreparable damage to the son they shared. Chapter 10. Face to Face. The community center classroom had been carefully arranged to feel neutral yet comfortable. Not too formal, not too casual. Large windows overlooked a community garden where autumn flowers still bloomed in defiance of the cooling weather. The furniture was arranged in a loose circle rather than across from each other, a subtle attempt to avoid an adversarial setup. Xavier arrived with Imani 15 minutes early, a habit she had instilled in him from childhood. He paced the room, examining educational posters and the bookshelf filled with music theory texts, his nervous energy manifesting in constant motion. Though he'd insisted on this meeting now that it was imminent, doubts clouded his features. "You don't have to do this," Imani reminded him, watching her son with a mixture of pride and concern. "We can cancel. The court agreement doesn't require—" "I need to," Xavier interrupted, running his hand through his close-cropped curls, a gesture so like his father's that Imani felt her heart clench. "I've spent my whole life with this blank space. Even if it goes terribly, knowing is better than wondering." Imani nodded, understanding. She had raised him to face difficult situations directly, to seek truth rather than comfort. Now her parenting philosophy was being tested in the most personal way possible. When Thaddeus arrived precisely at the appointed time, neither too early, which might have seemed eager, nor late, which would have been disrespectful, Xavier was struck by the physical similarities between them that went beyond their shared eye color. The way Thaddeus stood, the angle of his jaw, even the unconscious gesture of adjusting his cuff. Xavier had seen these same mannerisms in his own mirror. "Hello, Xavier," Thaddeus said, his voice betraying nervousness despite his composed exterior. "Mr. Mercer," Xavier replied formally, remaining standing until his mother indicated they should sit. An awkward silence followed as they settled into their seats, the weight of 16 years of absence filling the room like a fourth presence. Thaddeus had prepared conversation topics, researched Xavier's achievements, even rehearsed potential questions, but now found himself wordless before this young man who was simultaneously stranger and flesh of his flesh. "I don't know how to do this," Xavier admitted suddenly, his directness breaking the tension. "There's no protocol for meeting your biological father when you're 16. A surprised laugh escaped Thaddeus. "There's no protocol for meeting your teenage son for the first time either." "Then I guess we're both improvising," Xavier said, a hint of a smile softening his serious expression. The ice broken, they began with safe topics: Xavier's academic interests, his musical accomplishments, his plans for college applications. Thaddeus shared relevant parts of his own educational background, careful not to present himself as a template Xavier should follow. Imani remained mostly silent, observing the interaction with a mother's protective instinct, while allowing Xavier the space to navigate this new relationship himself. She noticed how similar their analytical thinking styles were, how they both used their hands to emphasize points, how they shared a tendency to furrow their brows when concentrating. Gradually, Xavier's questions became more personal, more pointed. "Why now? After 16 years?" He leaned forward slightly, his posture indicating this was the question that mattered most. Thaddeus met his gaze directly. The honest answer is that I only discovered your existence 2 months ago when I saw you in that news segment with your mother. But you knew Mom was pregnant when she left. Xavier's statement held no accusation, just a request for truth. I did. Thaddeus glanced briefly at Imani before continuing. And I behaved in a way that I've regretted every day since. I questioned the pregnancy's timing, its paternity. The admission clearly pained him. I said things no man should ever say to the woman carrying his child. By the time I came to my senses, your mother had made the right choice to protect you from me. Xavier absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. So you're saying you didn't look for us because you thought Mom didn't want to be found? Not because you didn't want to know me? The question revealed a vulnerability beneath Xavier's composed exterior, the fundamental doubt of a child who grew up without a father. Was I unwanted? No, Thaddeus said firmly. I didn't look because I believed I had forfeited the right to be your father, because my behavior had been so inexcusable that your mother was justified in keeping you away from me. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. My failure to search for you was about my shame, not about any lack of desire to know you. Xavier nodded slowly, processing this response. And now you're suing her. His tone shifted, protective of his mother. I'm trying to establish a legal framework for knowing you, Thaddeus clarified, sensing dangerous territory. The legal approach was not my best decision. Another mistake in a long list where your mother is concerned. It feels like punishment, Xavier observed. Like you're using the courts to force your way into our lives because you're angry about missing 16 years. You're perceptive, Thaddeus acknowledged, the compliment automatic but sincere. There was anger mixed with my motives, hurt pride, but primarily I didn't know how else to reach you. I should have found a better way, one that respected your mother's concerns rather than bulldozing through them. You could have written a letter, Xavier suggested, the simplicity of the alternative highlighting the unnecessarily complicated approach Thaddeus had chosen. Asked for a meeting like this one without lawyers and judges involved? Imani watched her son with quiet pride. He had cut through the adult complications to the heart of the matter, with the directness only adolescence can truly master. You're right, Thaddeus admitted. I defaulted to using power and legal authority rather than simply asking. That's a pattern I'm trying to break. The conversation continued, moving from past mistakes to present circumstances. Xavier revealed himself to be thoughtful, perceptive, and refreshingly direct. A young man raised with strong values and the confidence to express them. He asked about Thaddeus's childhood, his relationship with his own father, his career beyond the headlines about Mercer Financial. What do you want from me? Xavier asked finally, the question that had been underlying their entire interaction. What kind of relationship are you looking for? Thaddeus considered his answer carefully, aware that this moment might determine their future. I want to know you, he said simply. To understand who you are. To be whatever kind of father figure you're comfortable with, whether that's a distant supporter or someone more involved in your life. And if I don't want a father figure at all, Xavier challenged, testing boundaries, then I'd respect that while hoping you might someday change your mind. Thaddeus met his son's gaze steadily. I won't force a relationship. I've learned, too late, that relationships built on obligation or legal requirement aren't real connections. Something in this answer seemed to satisfy Xavier. He nodded, then looked at his watch. I have saxophone practice in 40 minutes. I should probably go. Of course, Thaddeus agreed, rising as Xavier stood. Thank you for meeting with me. It means more than I can express. Xavier hesitated, then extended his hand formally. It was interesting to meet you. Properly, I mean. Thaddeus shook his hand, trying not to show how much the simple gesture affected him. May I? Would it be all right if we met again sometime? Xavier looked to his mother, then back to Thaddeus. I'll think about it. Mom has your number. As they prepared to leave, Thaddeus spoke directly to Imani for the first time since their initial greetings. Thank you for arranging this, for being willing to try. She nodded, her expression guarded but less hostile than at their previous encounters. It was Xavier's choice. His well-being is my priority. As it should be, Thaddeus acknowledged. You've done an extraordinary job raising him. A flicker of surprise crossed her face at the compliment, quickly masked. We should go. Xavier's instructor doesn't tolerate tardiness. After they left, Thaddeus remained seated, replaying the conversation in his mind. The meeting had gone neither as well as he'd hoped, nor as badly as he'd feared. Xavier had shown remarkable maturity, asking difficult questions directly and processing the answers thoughtfully. The boy had Imani's emotional intelligence combined with an analytical mind that reminded Thaddeus of himself at his best, not the corporate automaton he sometimes felt he'd become. For the first time, he considered the possibility that his presence in Xavier's life might not be an unmitigated benefit. The boy had a good mother, a stable home, achievements and talents that had flourished without his involvement. Perhaps his sudden appearance was selfish, disruptive rather than constructive. Yet something in Xavier's questions suggested a need, a curiosity about his origins that might never be satisfied without this connection. The challenge would be building that connection without damaging what was already strong and beautiful in the boy's life. As Thaddeus gathered his things to leave, he noticed a saxophone case in the corner of the room, likely left from an earlier music lesson. On impulse, he took out his phone and began researching reputable music programs that offered scholarships, thinking not of how to insert himself into Xavier's life, but how he might support the path the boy was already on. It was a small shift in perspective, but perhaps the beginning of learning to be a father rather than merely claiming the title. 3 days later, as Thaddeus was reviewing quarterly reports in his office, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Xavier. Mom gave me your number. There's a math competition at school next Friday, 4 p.m., if you want to come. Thaddeus stared at the message, rereading it several times to ensure he hadn't misunderstood. Then he replied simply, I'll be there. Thank you for the invitation. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance. It wasn't the warm father-son relationship he had begun to imagine, but it was an opening, a tentative step towards something that might, with patience and respect, grow into a meaningful connection. For now, that was enough. Chapter 11. The Turning Point. The court case continued in the background, becoming increasingly contentious as Thaddeus's attorneys dug into Imani's past, questioning her decision to keep Xavier from his father. Imani's team highlighted Thaddeus's absence and initial rejection, painting him as an opportunistic father interested only when convenience and public image aligned. The legal battle threatened to overshadow the fragile relationship beginning to form between father and son. Xavier's math competition proved to be the first of several cautious invitations. Thaddeus attended each one, sitting quietly in the audience, never approaching Xavier unless the boy initiated contact, never staying longer than seemed welcome. He watched his son win first place in the regional mathematics championship with a complex theorem application that left the judges visibly impressed. He applauded from the middle rows during Xavier's jazz quartet performance at a downtown festival. He even attended a parent-teacher conference, sitting silently beside Imani as Xavier's calculus teacher praised his innovative problem-solving approaches. Each interaction was carefully choreographed, boundaries clearly established and respected. Xavier would nod a greeting when he spotted Thaddeus in the audience. Sometimes he would spare a few minutes for conversation afterward. Imani maintained a polite distance, neither encouraging nor discouraging the tentative relationship developing between father and son. Their third significant meeting occurred at a university mathematics competition, where Xavier was presenting original research on musical harmonics and mathematical patterns, a perfect blend of his dual passions. His project explored how box compositions followed mathematical principles centuries before they were formally identified, analyzing patterns that connected music theory to advanced calculus. Thaddeus sat in the audience, genuinely impressed by his son's presentation and the confident way he fielded questions from professors and industry professionals. Afterward, they walked through the campus together, Imani giving them space while remaining in sight, her protective instincts balanced against Xavier's growing comfort with his biological father. "Why did you really come looking for me?" Xavier asked suddenly, stopping beside a fountain. "The truth this time, not the careful answer you've been giving." Thaddeus, caught off guard by the directness, took a moment before answering. "Initially, I wanted to make up for lost time, to have the relationship I thought I deserved. And now? Now." Thaddeus watched a leaf floating in the fountain water, circling slowly toward the center. "Now I want what's best for you, even if that means I'm not a major part of your life." The honesty of the answer seemed to reach Xavier. For the first time, he relaxed slightly in Thaddeus's presence. "I don't know what role you're supposed to play in my life," he admitted. "I've had 16 years to imagine what having a father would be like. Reality is complicated." "Complicated is better than absent," Thaddeus offered. "At least we have the chance to figure it out together." Xavier considered this, then changed the subject to safer territory: his upcoming college applications, his hopes for music conservatory programs with strong mathematics departments, his struggle to decide between seemingly opposing paths. "Why choose?" Thaddeus asked. "The most interesting breakthroughs happen at the intersection of different disciplines. Music and mathematics have always been connected. You've proven that with your research." Xavier looked at him with sudden interest. "That's what Mom always says, that I don't have to choose between parts of myself." "She's right," Thaddeus agreed, careful not to seem as though he was taking credit for Imani's wisdom. "The world tries to put people in boxes. The most successful ones refuse to stay there." Later that week, before the next court date, Thaddeus received an unexpected visitor at his office. Loretta Rhodes, Imani's mother, now in her 70s but still formidable, arrived unannounced and unintimidated by the corporate surroundings. His assistant, clearly overawed by the elderly woman's commanding presence, showed her in with apologetic glances at her boss. "Mrs. Rhodes," he greeted her with surprise rising from behind his desk, "how can I help you?" "You can help by listening," she said, settling into a chair without waiting for an invitation, her cane positioned firmly between them like a boundary marker. "I've watched my daughter raise that boy with nothing but love and integrity. I've seen her work 3 jobs so he could have opportunities. I've watched her set aside her own dreams to build his foundation. I respect how she's raised him," Thaddeus began, choosing his words carefully. "No, you don't," Loretta cut him off, her voice carrying the weight of decades of wisdom and justified skepticism. "If you did, you wouldn't be trying to force your way into his life through courts and lawyers. You wouldn't be letting your attorneys question her judgment and dedication. My grandson is not a possession to be claimed by whoever has the most expensive legal team. He's a young man with thoughts and feelings of his own." Thaddeus felt properly chastised, reminded viscerally of the few times his own grandmother had corrected his behavior with similar directness before her death when he was 12. "What would you have me do, Mrs. Rhodes?" "The right thing for once in your life where my daughter and grandson are concerned." She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Drop the lawsuit. Approach this with humility instead of entitlement. Let Xavier set the pace. Prove yourself worthy of knowing him instead of demanding access as your right. And if Imani decides to cut off contact completely once the legal pressure is removed, the question revealed his deepest fear, that without the framework of court proceedings, he would lose the tentative connection he'd begun to build with his son. Loretta's expression softened marginally. My daughter is many things: stubborn, protective, sometimes too proud for her own good. But she's not vindictive. She wants Xavier to be whole, to know all parts of himself. If you approach her with genuine respect instead of legal threats, you might be surprised at what's possible. After she left, the words echoing in his mind, Thaddeus canceled his afternoon meetings and drove to the one place he'd avoided since beginning this journey: his mother's grave. Elizabeth Mercer had died when Thaddeus was in college, never living to see him marry or build his career. She had been the counterbalance to Reginald's ruthless ambition, the voice of compassion in the Mercer household. Standing before her headstone in the manicured cemetery, Thaddeus found himself speaking aloud for the first time about Xavier, about Imani, about the mistakes he'd made, and his uncertainty about how to fix them. "You would have loved him, Mom," he said, his voice carrying on the autumn breeze. "He has your musical talent, your kindness. You would have been so proud of the man Imani has raised him to be." The realization hit him then. Imani had done exactly what his mother would have wanted for her grandson. She had prioritized Xavier's character development over status or wealth, had ensured he grew up confident in his worth rather than his inheritance. All the things Elizabeth had tried to instill in Thaddeus before her untimely death, Imani had successfully cultivated in their son. That night, Thaddeus called his attorney. "I want to withdraw the petition," he said without preamble. "All of it, the paternity suit, the visitation request, everything." "That would be a serious mistake," Martin Sloan advised. "We've made significant progress. The DNA tests confirm paternity. The judge seems sympathetic to your position." "The judge is sympathetic to Xavier's welfare," Thaddeus corrected. "And continuing this legal battle isn't in his best interest. I want to build a relationship with my son based on mutual respect, not court orders." "Without legal recognition, you have no standing if Ms. Rhodes decides to cut off contact," Sloan warned. "You'd be entirely at her mercy." "Maybe that's appropriate, given our history," Thaddeus replied, the admission difficult but necessary. "File the paperwork to withdraw all pending motions before tomorrow's hearing." The next morning, when everyone assembled in court, Martin Sloan addressed Judge Watkins with visible reluctance. "Your Honor, my client wishes to make a statement and propose an alternative resolution." Thaddeus approached the stand, ignoring his father's thunderous expression from the gallery. Looking directly at Imani, he spoke from the heart rather than from prepared notes. "I've been approaching this all wrong. 16 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life when I let pride and exhaustion and my father's prejudice cloud my judgment. I lost the woman I loved and the chance to know my son. That was my failing, not Imani's." He turned to the judge. "I'm withdrawing my petition for court-mandated visitation. Instead, I'd like to propose a voluntary arrangement where Xavier determines the nature and frequency of our contact. If he wants me in his life, I'll be there on his terms. If not, I'll respect that too." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Watkins looked to Imani. "Ms. Rhodes, your response?" Imani, visibly moved but cautious, stood. "I've only ever wanted to protect my son. If this arrangement truly puts Xavier's wishes first, I won't oppose it." Judge Watkins nodded, seeming pleased with this resolution. "I'll have my clerk draw up a stipulated agreement. We'll recess until then." In the hallway, Thaddeus approached Imani. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she warned. "Xavier may still choose limited contact." "I know, and I'll accept whatever he decides." He hesitated before adding, Your mother paid me a visit. She's quite formidable. A ghost of a smile crossed Imani's face. She always has been. We wouldn't have survived without her. The simple statement carried volumes of unspoken history, years of struggle and sacrifice that Thaddeus had been absent for, protected by his wealth and privilege, while Imani built a life for their son without his support. I've set up a trust for Xavier's education, he said carefully. No strings attached. It's already in his name, with you as trustee until he's 21. Whether he wants a relationship with me or not, his future education is secured. Imani's expression turned wary. We don't need your money. I know you don't. This isn't about need. It's about my responsibility to contribute to his future. Thaddeus kept his voice calm, reasonable. If you're uncomfortable with it, the funds can be redirected to a scholarship for your nonprofit in Xavier's name. Before she could respond, Xavier himself appeared, having been waiting in a conference room with a court-appointed guardian during the proceedings. Is it over? He asked, looking between them. Yes, Imani confirmed. Mr. Mercer has withdrawn his petition. Any future contact will be entirely your choice, on your terms. Xavier studied Thaddeus with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through pretense. Why? Because I realized I was approaching this like a business acquisition rather than a relationship, Thaddeus answered honestly. Trying to negotiate terms and conditions instead of earning trust. That's not how family works, at least not how it should work. Something shifted between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first step toward healing the wounds that had defined their relationships for 16 years. Chapter 12, Full Circle. 3 years later, Xavier Thaddeus Rhodes Mercer stood at the podium as valedictorian. The morning sunlight streamed through high windows, catching on his ceremonial chords and illuminating his confident smile. At 19, he carried himself with a poise that blended his mother's grace and his father's presence. In the audience, Imani sat beside Loretta, pride evident in her tears. 3 rows behind them, respecting invisible boundaries still in place, sat Thaddeus. Reginald was absent, having disowned his son, when Thaddeus refused to pressure Xavier into Harvard Business instead of MIT's dual mathematics and music program. Our lives are compositions, Xavier told his classmates, his voice carrying the musical cadence inherited from his mother. We're given some notes by circumstance, some by choice. The harmony comes not from perfection, but from how we resolve the dissonance. He paused, his eyes finding both his parents in the audience. I've learned that family isn't just about shared DNA or names on certificates. It's about who shows up, who listens, who respects your journey even when it's not the one they would have chosen. I'm grateful to have had a mother who taught me dignity can't be bought and resilience can't be inherited. It must be earned through challenges faced with grace. His gaze shifted slightly toward Thaddeus. And I've learned that it's never too late to build bridges, to acknowledge mistakes, to become better than we once were. Second chances aren't guaranteed, but when offered, they can become the most beautiful passages in our life's composition. The past 3 years had been a careful building of bridges. Monthly meetings became weekly conversations, boundaries established, respected, occasionally expanded. Trust earned slowly through consistency rather than demanded through legal rights. For his 18th birthday, Xavier had chosen to legally hyphenate his last name, a decision that had moved Thaddeus to tears when presented with the court documents already filed and approved. I want to honor both parts of who I am, Xavier had explained. The Rhodes who was raised with love and music, and the Mercer I'm just beginning to know. After the ceremony, as families gathered on the lawn, Thaddeus approached Imani, maintaining the respectful distance that had become their norm. He's remarkable, he said quietly. All you're doing. Not all, Imani conceded, her voice softer than it had been in years when addressing him. These past years, you've shown up consistently. That matters. They stood in companionable silence, watching Xavier receive congratulations, his graduation robe billowing in the June breeze. I never apologized properly, Thaddeus said. Not for everything. I was cruel when you needed me most. I let my father's prejudice influence me. Yes, you did, Imani agreed, but her voice held no bitterness. I've never stopped loving you, he admitted. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know. Imani studied him. The years had matured him, grief and regret carving wisdom into his features. Their shared journey had revealed a Thaddeus far different from the ambitious young executive who had once chosen career over family. She had watched him stand up to his father, sacrifice his inheritance, and patiently earn Xavier's trust without once trying to buy his affection. Love isn't enough on its own, she said finally. It needs respect, trust, and shared values. I know that now. She nodded. Xavier's leaving for MIT next month. The jazz program won't know what hit them. Full scholarship, Thaddeus noted proudly, though I've set up that trust for anything extra he might need. I accepted that because it was for him, not me, Imani reminded him. I know. He paused, gathering courage. Would you consider having dinner sometime? Just to talk about Xavier at first, but maybe eventually. Eventually what? Imani asked, something softening in her expression. Eventually whatever you want. Friendship, closure, or maybe, if I'm very lucky, a second chance I don't deserve. Xavier approached them, cap askew, eyes bright with the day's significance. Mom, Dad, they want pictures by the fountain. Imani looked at Thaddeus, then back at their son, this miracle they had created together, this bridge between their separate worlds. We're coming. As they walked across the lawn together, Xavier slightly ahead, Imani spoke quietly, so only Thaddeus could hear. Dinner, once a month. We'll see where it leads. Thaddeus wanted to reach for her hand but restrained himself. Some distances could only be crossed with time and patience. Thank you, he said simply. The photographer positioned them by the fountain, Xavier in the center, Imani and Thaddeus on either side. A little closer together, please, he instructed. As they stepped toward each other, closing the physical space that had stood as a metaphor for their emotional distance, Xavier put an arm around each parent. For just a moment they were connected, not as they once were, not as they might someday be, but as they were now. Three people bound by blood and history, by mistakes and forgiveness, by the weight of words once spoken and those still finding their way to the surface. The camera flashed, capturing them in that perfect, imperfect moment. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better, something real. Not forgiveness complete, not reconciliation guaranteed, but an opening. A chance to finally say the words that had remained unspoken for 20 years. A new composition, its melody still being written, its harmony still finding its way. And sometimes that's where the most beautiful music begins.